early. So the reason I wanted to do this is because I was watching Dr. Beres and his team's work doing ultra early research for a lot of years already across parts of Western Canada. And I found it really interesting, and I thought it would have a good fit in our area. And so he's going to speak in a few minutes here. But for me, I think everyone's like, well, why are you doing that? Like, why would you bother doing that? This year turned out to be a really good year to do it because there was a lot of open in the winter. Oh, Rand, do you have those handouts for, do you guys want to both pass those out to everybody? I've got some temperature maps on the back of our handouts showing what we have in all these plots, and actually the soil temp and the air temp, and those charts were done from the crop intel probe in the field. So the reasons for ultra early is, we're too busy at winter wheat timing. People don't want to plant winter wheat because they're too busy and don't have time to get fields prepped, staff and trucks during winter wheat planting or fall crop planting. Selling a different class of wheats, so CWRS and Durham versus more feed or milling winter wheat market class. Yield advantage, assuming we have a year like this, maybe not the previous year. The last few years have been a little hit or miss for when rain comes. Avoiding sawfly. Winter wheat seems to avoid sawfly. There's no science around this, but I have a feeling that we're avoiding some sawfly by seeding really early. So I think that's something with a non-solid stem variety. Beating the heat stress at flowering, beating fusarium timing at flowering, and a little earlier start to harvest. You're going to see these plots are flowering. Some of the January, February seeded are flowering right now. Our winter wheat is flowering right now, and it was planted at normal time in September. And some say, some people tell me, oh, well, I seed early already. I seed in April. And I'm not talking about moving your first seeding date up. I'm talking about moving the middle or the last seeding date on your farm. So when was the last date you planted on your farm this year? Can we move that up a few days? So I think that's what this gains us. It doesn't gain you, if you're already starting in April, well, it's good. But can you move up your last starting date on your farm? And more acres per drill. And a couple tips, I think, from that I see on practical, like how to actually do it. Pre-burn that field in early October to prep the field. Prep it with a residual broadleaf if you want. Get that field prepped so you're ready to seed midwinter as if you were going to plant a winter wheat in early October. And book seed in October. If we know there's a variety or you need seed in December or January or February, we'll prioritize cleaning that lot or make sure we have the right variety for what you want to plant. Ready to go, because there's times we're out of a variety and don't have it ready in time. If it's treating, let us know so we can have that seed treatment on hand, because we try not to carry too much seed treatment over the winter. So we want to have that in the chem shed ready to go if you're going to be needing it treated in January or February or March. And then how are you going to fertilize? Is it through your drill? Is the drill service? Is the tractor service? Is it accessible or is it buried? So stuff to think about in the fall. And then, is your staff skiing? This sounds like a terrible idea, actually. We want to go on holidays in the winter, so that is a holdup, right? Are your staff away at training, courses, holidays, whatever? So yeah, who wants to do this in the winter? Nobody. So, but I think there's more money to be made on average by doing this in southern Alberta, mainly on dryland, but I think even irrigation, there's some risk to spread as well. So Brian, if you want to come up here and just give us a kind of a recap on what you've been up to before we go walk through the plots and look at what we planted here.
Okay, well, thanks, Greg. And I owe farmers like Greg a big thanks because, as scientists, you can come up with ideas. But like every technology and innovation, like there's that critical gap to really scale it. Especially when you're like really convinced that it's something that would work and have an impact. And so been real lucky to have farmers like Greg who've taken it and they've made it their own. I'll tell you about how it came to be, and then we'll discuss, I guess, because Greg would have tweaked it a little bit, as well as other farmers to make it fit. But basically it was an idea of, I think 2012, I was doing work on sawfly, actually, going down to Montana State for a meeting, and there were at the end of March, there were Montana farmers in the field, but they weren't planting. They were still I was still kind of cowboy farming down there where it was just wheat fallow, but they were in there working their fields. And I was like, we were doing a ton of work on winter wheat and just really not getting it to move much past 1 million acres, and it would drop below and then come back up. And so I like, okay, we've got to start doing something with spring wheat. And there's a bit of a gap here, I think, or an opportunity to do something like this. But then, okay, how would you put together a practice that you could hand over to a farmer to actually make it work? And so that's where we came up with this idea of a prescriptive practice of just forget about the calendar date, extremely forget about the calendar date, and just start monitoring your soil temperatures. And with a practical idea of, well, even if the soil was, below zero, we wouldn't even bother trying to look at that because, super good chance that you've got some frozen soil underneath and you're going to rip up big aggregates if you're have an aggressive drill. So we started at zero in the top 2 inches, not the top inch, but the top 2 inches. So down 2 inches. Once it hit zero, we started planting, and every 2 degrees we'd plant again to see what we would see between 0 and then we went to 10. And 10 is kind of an interesting number because back in the day, if you looked at old Alberta Ag and other government documents, they would say that 20 degrees was your optimum, 17 to 20. So optimum. And that's what a lot of farmers, when you take that plus crop insurance, we used to have a farm out by Ready Made. The cutoff date for cereals there was May 10th. And so I know for a fact that the farmers assumed, okay, if I'm in by May 10th, there's no biological repercussions. And they're thinking, of course, business and economic considerations to get in by that date. But there was never a thought to like, am I leaving a lot of yield on the table by doing this or not? And then, so what we found with ours was, it was somewhat surprising because the other piece to it was like, okay, we're going to need special genetics because if I go to just plant durum or spring wheat at 0 and that 0 ends up being the earliest we've done it, I think was the same time Greg did this year, like January 25th. Before that, it was February 9th. That's viewed as insanity or heresy if you're trying to do that with spring wheat. But the reality is when you think about that and where we are in the northerly latitudes, parts of the prairies, I think, parallel Siberia, like just by default, the breeders aren't doing it intentionally, but you're building in this resilience to the abiotic stress of super cold soils, sort of by default, and how they select and what really hums along at these earlier dates. So we ended up not needing any special genetics. We looked at it, and there, in the future there might still be an opportunity for it, but the reality is, for the most part, the practice is all you need is this, steal your wife, mom, whatever, thermometer, meat thermometer, and you can get going in your field and you're ready to go pretty much. And like Greg said, once you figure it out, then you can really sort of optimize it by planning in the fall, okay, where am I going to do this? So, some fall applied soil residual herbicides perhaps to give you some early weed control, because obviously you're not going in ahead with a pre-seed burn down. Now that said, on our plots, which are kind of like the size of these, not obviously big fields, but we haven't seen a big issue with weeds anyway. We do our in-crop, and that seems to be all we need anyway. But if you want to, if you're in a challenging environment with some heavier weed pressure, that fall applied soil residual herbicide is a really good fix for that. And then Greg talked about the economic considerations. If you take ultra early seeding and then some of the other practices we've preached about with some of our other studies about higher seeding rates and whatnot, if you take that package over here and compare it to a conventional practice over here with later seeding, for the Lethbridge area, you're probably leaving on average $200 a hectare on the table potentially by not adopting that and just continually going with that. Now somebody will say, as to Greg alluded to also, is like, well, okay, I don't think this works as good as you say. Look at last year. And again, I grew up here. So a year like last year, where we had not a lot of rain in the early part of the spring, which is deadly for winter wheat, we know, and definitely can set back ultra early because it somewhat mimics that. And then we had later rains, plus we had, I think at our site, we had one day that went over 30 degrees. So are you gonna bank on that environment, or are you gonna bank on the environment that we consistently see 8 out of 10 years, which is earlier spring rains, as soon as June's over, so is the rain, and now you're into pretty intense heat and drought stress. And if you've planted late, now it's flowering in July, and we know anything above 30, 31 will cause floret abortion. And so now your seed numbers are down. And then if you've planted lighter, you have way fewer heads per square foot or meter, and now you've suffered a yield loss. The last time I remember a year like last year, and I know it vividly because I bought a boat that year, is that it rained every day, it seemed like, in July, and that was 1990, 1991, I forget, or 92 in there. And I never really saw a year since. So I would be more inclined to believe the other 8 out of 10 years where we're going to get intense heat and drought stress in July. And if there's a practice that we can take that critical growth period, which is once they start stem jointing and just past flowering, if we can take that and shift it with earlier planting using a prescriptive practice so that our flowering is over, and it's going to be over, I think, by next week before the heat comes potentially, we're far better ahead more consistently year after year. So I don't know, is that good enough, or what, any other?
Well, we have
things I
one
should
question
touch on?
here.
Yeah.
If we were to grow a field of seed ultra early, and we were to harvest that as a seed production field, does it become more tolerant to those conditions, or is a variety and that's that?
Yeah, you wouldn't really select for within that environment anymore. You know, I think what you'd want to be striving for is just the purity of that seed, and if it's nice plump seed, the vigor and the germ, I think, is going to drive that more than any sort of reselection that might be going on.
Yeah, and Sarah Foster at 2020, she's taken some samples from different seed lots, different years, and she's done some work on that. You know, is vigor really what the best test for people that are going to be doing things like this? Because yeah, we want the best seed lots or the best quality of germ and vigor, or that ultra early vigor that's maybe different than vigor, where it warms up, cools down, warms up, cools down. After that seed's been germinated, how does that impact? Is it the same as vigor? So she's been doing some work on that.
Yeah, and I guess that leads into another question about, do I need a seed treatment? Is that more critical with ultra early?
Say yes.
Well, you know,
I think you said otherwise, right?
well, I mean, you try and set your bias aside, but we did a really nice project, 16 or 24 site years, all across the prairies on seed treatments in winter wheat. And what we discovered was that the advantage wasn't really because you're protecting the plant from a biotic threat like disease or insect. What it was doing was it was changing the metabolic pathways in that plant such that you get a way significantly improved resistance to abiotic threats. So that cold and so on, drought, wind desiccation, you name it. And that resulted always in significantly more plants per square foot and higher yield. But, so then you'd think theoretically, and that's what I thought going in with a bit of bias, we did a 4 or 5 year study just at Lethbridge with those same seed treatments, a dual fungicide insecticide, and with ultra early, it didn't really matter. But that kind of trends a bit with seed treatments in spring wheat right locally. You may or may not need them. The only thing that I say about that and things like, you know, seeding rates, higher seeding rates, and even some of your enhanced efficiency fertilizers is that if you pencil out the cost per acre, you know, how many things do you want to stack that you can take to the bank on good insurance to get the optimal yield? And I think those fall within a category still, I could be wrong, I forget how much these seed treatments are, but to me they fall into that category of it's just good insurance just in case.
Yeah, you'd be in that $10 to $20 an acre depending on seed rates.
Okay, forget it then.
Insecticide. Yeah, like if you're doing like a 40 plants per square foot on a pretty plump seed lots, you could be there with a fungicide alone or fungicide insecticide. So I mean that'd be higher end, but
yeah, and I like the neonic component. Sorry, Greenpeace, but you know, it definitely made a difference, I think. But there are like dual fungicides that do also impart cold tolerance into plants. So you can use a dual fungicide like, what is it, Procero, I think we were using or something, and that would give you frost tolerance, and it actually does physically change the morphology of the plant. So that alone does do the same thing. I think you get an enhanced, I don't know what the added cost is with the insecticide, but you do, in my mind, get added abiotic resistance with it.
Yeah, you're looking at maybe $2 a bushel more, about.
Yeah, that's.
So could be $4, $5 an acre more, depending on the use rate. So.
Are you seeing a difference in varieties?
Difference in varieties.
Yeah, you might want to take that on. Like,
Well, we're going to look at that out here in a sec, but maybe talk about
yeah,
what you
okay.
saw.
So with ultra early, we didn't see a dramatic difference in varieties, which was kind of surprising. But back to my point earlier. Now, the one thing we're doing now with our current studies is because right away you show a farmer that ultra early can work, and then of course one of them says, "Well, why don't I just do it in the fall?" And I'm like, "Well, why don't you just plant winter wheat and get off my back?" But that doesn't work. So we started doing it. So we had to come up with a prescriptive practice. So ultra early, you're waiting for the soils to warm in winter until you get just like the sweet spot would be like 1 degree. But in the fall, we would wait until the soils would cool below 2 degrees, because if you're in 3-degree territory, it's probably going to sprout. So you wait till it cools down and then plant and see what happens. And with Durham, it was like sort of binary. Like you'd either get a decent stand, like similar to a 10-degree planting, which is significantly less than ultra early, or you'd get a train wreck. And then barley's kind of the same thing we're seeing. But honestly, like the varieties that are out here, Oakman, West King, we're doing that dormant planting with them, and they're all showing real good. With ultra early and Durham, to me, Defy seemed to be really good. You probably don't carry Defy, so I'm probably going to get walked out of here now. But statistically not massive. But Defy seemed to pop out a bit. Transcend was probably down, but there was Stronghold and some of those other ones. So if you've got lines that are like Stronghold or related to Stronghold, you'd be just fine there too.
And we put Oakman in this demo because Oakman's got the the first ergot resistance out of Durham's actually. So that's what we put in here because we figured it would be a hot variety as well. So Frontier, yeah, the Frontier Durham, yeah. And the Oakman's in here because it's a dryland seller because of the solid stem or semi-solid stem. So it's the best sawfly resistant CWRS out there right now.
Yeah, and to your point about the sawfly, we actually saw it in Swift Current where we were doing the Durham study. They got hammered by sawfly the one year, and sure enough, you could see the lines of the different plantings. And as you know, ultra early was here, and then it was 4, 6, 8, and then the final one was 10, and the 10 was leveled. And the 0s and 2s, they were like still standing. So it's kind of like those you mentioned earlier, those benefits, those intangibles that you get with a winter wheat system, escaping certain pests and disease cycles. It's a real thing.
We did some dormant seeding a year ago, and so we tried to wait until it was going to freeze up. Well, that was like mid-November, and then it didn't really freeze up. It warmed up in December again, so then stuff sprouted. And the dormant seeding, I find it's way too hard to actually pick your time, and it's stressful actually. Whereas the ultra early, it's like, oh, a Chinook's coming. Oh, is the drill ready? Okay. Like it's just so much more easy. And the seed bed was amazing. Like the January, everything was in the moisture. It was so beautiful. I mean, we're not always going to be able to seed in January, and I probably wouldn't recommend it from what we see out here. But the seed to soil contact was actually better in our January, February versus our April planting because we kind of had to water the plots up a little bit in April. Oh. So they're a little variable in the April ones. So. Yeah. Any other questions before we roll out to the beside us here?
What drill do you use, Greg?
This was done with a box drill, so it was a John Deere 455, 7.5-inch spacing, a small amount of phos with the seed, like 30 pounds with the seed. Joe took the lead on that on the team here, and we did the 40 plants per square foot across the Durham and spring wheats, and we planted from that end down to this end. These plots, this half got a PGR, kind of hurt a little bit. We'll talk about that when we're out there. That half did not. So that's the non-PGR half across everything we're going to see today. No PGR, PGR. Modus was used. Sorry?
PGR, which one?
Plant growth rate, Modus, plant growth regulator, yeah. And so as far as the drill goes, then we could seed 3 varieties at once because we calibrated each box for the seeding rate we wanted for each variety, and then we could just go park it in the shed. So it was kind of easy to just set it, go park it, do it, and then we didn't have to set it again, right? We could do it all winter long the same way. So, and that's why we just have 3 varieties because the drill has 3 boxes. So,
What did you say, disc?
a double disc.
Yeah.
So it's not a no-till drill. So that is one challenge we have out here. It's a double disc drill. So we had to do some tillage on the field. So, you know, it's always hard. I mean, doing any of this stuff has really led me to appreciate these guys more because that work is hard and it fails and it's way harder than it looks.
Yeah. So our drill, obviously it's not field scale, but it's basically, it's commercial in opener style. Like we're using the Conservapack opener, I think 9 or 10 inches on some of them, and then the other one we're using is the Pillar Laser opener system. Kind of like winter wheat a bit. If you're gonna nitpick, like when you're going in that early, like the discs might be a little bit better, similar to what we see in winter wheat over the knife. But it could also be with the knife, like the Conservapack. If you go in at 0 and you haven't confirmed that the field conditions are right and you start pulling up big aggregates. That happened once out of 10 years though for us. I mean, that's seed to soil contact obviously isn't going to be great there.
Yeah, and just so you have a lay of the land, like for our next tour this summer on the 16th of July, we've got durums and spring wheats and barleys. So it's all using the same drill, so that they all go that direction. And then this way is all the fall crops. And then we got a pulse demo on the field next door that we'll look at on July 16th. So we'll kind of do a quick skip through this in July, but not this in depth at all. So, any more questions? There is one farmer, Allison Davey at Tabor. She's doing a full circle of this, so she has more guts than we do. She did basically all of our seeding dates. We were within a day of each other or the same day, and she did a full field. And apparently, I haven't been out there, but apparently it looks amazing. So she planted spring wheat. It was Wesking, yeah, and it was but in like 30 or 40 acre chunks across 150.